Well guys, welcome back to the shop. I know it's been a while, but I've finally been able to complete this little 6-inch buoy that I started over a year ago. This is part 3 of 3 of the build's narration, where I get into the nitty-gritty details of the knife's construction. In the next couple of months, I'll edit a complete build video, set the music, so stay tuned for that. While I'm currently emotionally attached to this knife due to how long it took me to make, I think I'll put it up for sale this year, but I'm not quite sure for how much. So let me know in the comment section how much y'all think I should sell it for. In the last video, we successfully fit the guard to the ricasso, and that's what we're going to be picking up today. The next step will be fitting up some of the front spacers behind the guard. I'll be stacking 3 of these behind the guard, with the middle front spacer being copper for some contrast. The process here is fairly straightforward. I start by milling in a slot that is only a couple thousandths of an inch wider than the tang. After that, using a file with the sides ground flat, I reshape the rounded edges of the slot to more appropriately match the tang. On all of these spacers, I take care not to remove too much material, since I like having a snug fit with these spacers. I will be installing lineup pins and epoxying this handle together, however, I feel like having a snug fit yields a stronger finished product in addition to making the build process smoother. I'll be using this block of Westinghouse canvas micarta from Kyle. It was over a year ago that I received the block, and I'm not 100% sure where it came from, but I think this is part of a shipment from Maker's Material Supply. The first step of this process will be milling a slot in the center of the block. To do this, I'm using an extra long 3/16 of an inch end mill. This end mill took me a while to find online, and I'm happy I did because I use it all the time for handle blocks. You can see here that I traced a tang on the side of the handle block. This will allow me to eyeball the angle that I want to plunge in with the end mill. While this isn't an exact science, the closer you can get the correct angles here, the faster your fit up will go. Like the front spacers, I prefer to have this block fit on the tang fairly snug, so I'm careful not to get carried away with the milling. Using this broach I made years ago, I'll be squaring up the slot. Note the head of this broach is right under 1/8 of an inch, which allows me to get into tight tang slots for squaring. On a larger 3/16 of an inch slot like we have here, I'll guide the broach to one of the 4 corners at a time. Now it's time to add some alignment pins to the front spacer and handle block. I'll be using 1/16 of an inch hardened pins for this construction. I started by drilling the frontmost spacer, then assembling and clamping all 3 of them up against the guard. In this orientation, I can then superglue the 3 spacers together and use the frontmost spacer as a drill guide for the other 2. Overall, this went pretty smooth, but I did have the glue break loose during the first pin and had to go back to the knife and re-glue the assembly. After the holes are complete and the pieces are broken apart, I used a disc grinder to remove any excess glue. Some of the holes are just a little too tight for the pins, and I use a 1/16 of an inch drill bit on a hand drill to gently ream them. Next up, I'll be drilling the handle block to accept these pins. I assemble the pieces, glue the backmost spacer onto the handle block, and then use it as a drill guide with a handheld drill. I like to drill deep enough into the handle block so as not to need to adjust the length of the 1-inch hardened dowels. Once the holes are drilled and the surface cleaned up, I do a quick test fit to make sure everything goes together appropriately. To shape the guard, I drew up my profile in Fusion 360 and printed this tracing template out on my 3D printer to fit to my ricasso. Using a carbide scribe, I traced around the face of the guard and then rough profiled it to the scribe line using the bandsaw and 2x72 belt grinder. We'll come back later to finish this guard to a higher grit and round the corners. To shape and square up the front spacer, I used a square against the top and bottom of the ricasso to scribe in some target lines. After the frontmost spacer is done, I used it as a guide to shape the other two spacers. I transferred the top and bottom spacer's height onto the canvas micarta block, then used these markings to line up my handle template. I need to know with decent certainty where the handle will lie so I can drill my 1/8 of an inch handle pinhole into the block while it's still square and easy to clamp in my vise. With the hole drilled, I'll be using my custom 3D printed scribe to mark parallel lines across the block. The goal here is to get the block parallel with the ricasso while it's being held in alignment with the rest of the knife. With parallel sides, I can now retrace my handle template on the side of the block. This doesn't need to be perfect since I'll grind and check while closing into the final design numerous times. It's really handy having a grinder that can flip 90 degrees and use a contact wheel during this process so that you can continue to take advantage of the square parallel flats on the work rest. With the shape roughed in, I use my Sharpie height scribe to mark out new grinding targets and grind lines. I'll be Coke bottle shaping this handle with a palm swell, so these lines help me target the depth. On the front portion of the handle, I will slant them towards the front spacer. If I remember right, this came out to around 3/4 of an inch at the front spacer, and the thickest part of the handle was around 1 inch. I then used a 2-inch contact wheel to sculpt the rear of the handle. Once the profile is ground into the side of the handle, I start knocking down the corners of the handle to round things over. Grinding handles like this is for sure a skill that I have not mastered completely. I try to get as close as I can with a 320 grit belt towards the end of the job. rest of the finished shaping I'll do on the hand sanding bench with a half round file. Once I'm done with the handle shaping, I'll transfer the front of the handle onto the front spacers and then profile these spacers down to the scribed line. To give me a museum fit on this knife, I'll remove around 30 thousandths of an inch more around the perimeter of the front spacer. This will give me a space to round over on the front of the handle edge later in the build. At this point, the knife handle is around 85% complete, and the rest is mostly finishing work. I get the flats on the front spacers up to around 320 grit on the grinder and then hand sand them up to 1000. On the guard, I spent hours rounding over the corners with a file and then sanded up the 1200 grit with taped back strips of sandpaper. Both the front spacers and the guard will be brought back to the buffer shortly. The same hand sanding work was completed on the handle up to 1200 grit. During this process, I was careful to maintain symmetry on the handle ridge through the center of the handle. Instead of leaving the back of the handle flat, I domed it. Initially with the grinder, and then I finished it by hand. Now with the handle pretty much done, I'm going to drill the hole in the tang to accept my 1/8 of an inch handle pin. This handle was much too hard to drill, and I had to go back to the torch to remove some of the hardness. Even then, it was pretty hard to drill, and I barely got through it with a new 1/8 of an inch bit. After I had the handle tang drilled, I continued the finishing process by bullnosing the front of the handle and then buffing all the handle components. The very last thing I did before glue up was to dial in the hand sanding on the blade. During the build process, it acquired a few scratches that I had to level out in addition to cleaning up the spine and bottom of the ricasso. This is actually one mistake I made with this build. I should have finished the sanding at the top of the spine and the ricasso before fitting the guard. This is best practice to minimize the chances of removing too much material and ruining the guard fit. I started the glue up by mixing up a little bit of JB Weld as well as some G-Flex epoxy. I like using JB Weld around the guard and G-Flex on the handle components. I put some JB Weld on the tang first so that the voids will be filled around the guard when pressing it on. The handle is filled with G-Flex epoxy, and the whole assembly is carefully pushed together, allowing the glue to ooze out of the gaps and holes. I then drive the handle pin into the block and tang by putting it on the end of a drill. I taper the front of the pin to allow for easier entry and guidance into the holes. After 24 hours, I carefully cut off the bulk of the pin material, grind down a little closer with the 2x72 belt grinder, and then finally finish them by filing and hand sanding flush. Once they're flush and sanded up to 1200 grit, I hit it lightly on the buffer with some pink or white compound on the wheel. The last thing to do is sharpening. I use some scotch tape to protect the blade from scratches and then rough in my secondary bevel with a fresh belt on the 2x72. This is truly bulk removal and the angle need not be perfect here. Just make sure you're only applying light pressure so as not to overheat the edge. I then came over to my Wicked Edge Pro sharpener and swapped out the jaws for the thicker 1/4 inch spine of this knife. The process here is just a matter of setting your angle and working up the grits. I started with 100 grit and worked the edge up to over 1000 grit before stropping it with diamond compound covered leather. The main sharpening angle for this blade was 21 degrees and I came down to 20.5 degrees for stropping. Overall, I'm extremely happy with how this piece came out. I think I'm getting close to journeyman smith level work, and one of these days I'd love to attempt the ABS certification test. Like I said at the start of the video, I'm considering selling this blade, so let me know in the comments how much y'all think I should post it for. Also, if you see any parts of my build process that you think I could improve upon, please let me know. Lastly, I'll do my best to place the affiliate links below for the main tools I used in this build in case you're looking for them for your own shop. Until next time, I'll catch y'all on the flip side.